Panic saturated the station's artificial atmosphere as technicians and physicists rushed to correct whatever sensor error had surely occurred. Peering down upon us from the overhead walkway, Director Phelan visibly seethed, his eyes shifting rapidly between individuals as though in search of someone to blame. Looking around for some way to appear busy, my eyes quickly fell upon a small section of unoccupied wiring. Unfortunately, I was not an electrician, but given that I was relatively new to the station, there was a good chance he wouldn't notice. And so, as I stood there pretending to work, the director continued his tirade, directed at nobody in particular. "Galaxy clusters don't just vanish," he barked, further highlighting the obvious absurdity of our readings. If it somehow got out that our observatory station lost the Virgo cluster, Kepler explorations at large would never hear the end of it. As the director of this observatory, Phelan would likely be among those made to take the fall, so I could hardly blame him for being a tad frantic. Once the director finally turned his back to me, I made a break up the stairs from my station at the sensor control console to confer with the other physicists. "These readings don't make any sense," Jones hissed, punching the iron wall beside us with enough force to leave him stifling a wince. "The gravitational readings are consistent with previous measurements, but every telescope we had inside Virgo is down, and those outside of it are outputting obviously erroneous data." "Do you think it might be a cyber attack?" I asked, poring over the available datasets in search of something that might illuminate the root of our problem. "If it were, we'd probably be hearing similar reports from other stations," Rubin replied, typing in every troubleshooting command prompt he knew in an effort to restore our system to working order. "This is localized to us alone." Of course, that didn't make any sense at all. Anyone able to wreak this kind of havoc on Kepler exploration systems could potentially hold humanity's entire warp highway hostage, so why bother with an observation post as non-critical as this one? Hours of attempted troubleshooting passed by like seconds, as everyone on the station frantically rushed to figure out what could possibly have wreaked such havoc upon our millions of dollars of equipment. We tried everything from resetting the sensors to recalibrating the entire system. None of it seemed to have the desired effect. "Any luck?" asked Director Phelan, no longer sounding angry so much as exhausted as he approached the three of us from behind. Though far from a physical threat with his short, pudgy frame, our boss nevertheless wielded an aura of authority the likes of which few others could muster. Not wanting to be the one to tell the director, I kept my head down as Jones, the physicist 5 years my senior on this station, offered up a status report. "It's no good." He sighed defeatedly. "Every sensor in the array is outputting rogue data, and we don't know why. Our best bet is probably a manual reset." Rubin shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant in spite of the sweat glistening on his brow. "We'll have to take the interstellar shuttle out into Virgo." At that, Phelan sighed. His ships were an expensive tool to use, whereas most spacecraft could only travel long distances through the warp highway. I's vehicles could punch their own holes into space-time, creating impromptu warp gates to travel through. Massive as that upside was, the downside had a hell of a lot more zeros and a $sign at the end. "You are aware that a round trip like that would cost us millions, right?" "We can write it off as emergency maintenance," Jones interjected, already selecting the last known coordinates of our now unresponsive main telescope and uploading them to the ship's piloting AI, Karen. "Listen, do you want this fixed or not? Because a manual reset might be the only way." After a long few moments of contemplation, the director conceded with a groan. "Just get it done fast," he grumbled. "And if we get slapped with a company audit, then I'm telling the higher-ups exactly whose idea it was to waste 0.5 metric ton of antimatter." Sour though it was, The director's parting note nevertheless came as music to the ears of Reuben, who wasted no time in jumping out of his seat the moment Phelan dipped from sight. "Ever been on board a Styx class, Henry?" "Can't say I have," I replied, attempting to conceal my reluctance beneath a calculating veneer. Compared to the warp highway, I's vehicles were not only less fuel efficient, but also far more error-prone. The warp failure rate may be minimal, but it's still 2 orders of magnitude higher than that of the gateways. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to come along, but it would probably be better if I stayed here and kept an eye on the readings while you and Jones go out to fix this. Spinning around in his swivel chair to face me, Jones shook his head to signal a negative. "Fortunately for you, Henry, I don't double as a mechanical engineer, which means you're actually more qualified to do this than I am. You and Reuben go ahead. I'll hold down the fort here." "Awesome!" Smiling through clenched teeth so as not to project the pit of anxiety welling up in my stomach, I allowed the excited physicist to herd me through the halls and into a nearby elevator before pressing his finger against the button labeled H for hangar. "There's nothing to worry about," I murmured to myself, attempting to calm my frazzled nerves. "Relax." Reuben smiled, placing his hand upon my shoulder in an absolutely undeserved mentor-like gesture. "It's safer than a road trip back on Earth." While technically true, my co-worker's blasé equivalency did precisely nothing to ease my nerves. The outcome of a car crash can be horrific, but if I had to choose between dying quickly in a wreck or slowly stranded out in space, I sure as hell wouldn't be picking the latter. Much as I adored the cosmos in all its vast beauty, having my body spend the next eternity floating in empty space, married to the void, was not on my bucket list. Even still, I managed to keep a straight face as the elevator's all-too-short journey came to a close, its doors retreating back out of sight, and in their place, unveiling our station's humble hangar bay. Lined up against this wide hallway's left side, 2 vessels peered back at us with a glimmer as the motion-activated lights flickered on, illuminating the hunched-over silhouette of Waylon, the station's aerospace technician, who had apparently been so fixated upon his task that he either didn't notice or didn't care about the area's relative darkness. "What are you two here for?" he asked, not even bothering to turn around and face us as he reached into his toolbox and from within produced a small wrench. "Something's wrong with the sensor array," explained Reuben, approaching the station's sole interstellar ship and knocking heartily upon its titanium hull. "We're taking the Styx to check it out." "Not without me, you're not!" the tech barked, hurriedly tightening a bolt on the main transport before tossing the wrench back into his toolbox and rushing to intercept my coworker on his path to the IS shuttle. "That ship is valuable Kepler explorations equipment, and company policy states that a licensed pilot has to be present on board any such vessel in case of an AI malfunction." "Okay, but has a Karen AI ever—" "Yes, several times actually," Waylon interrupted, predicting precisely the moronic question Reuben was about to ask. The 2236 Trappist incident, the 2241 stranding, and even as recent as 2255, last year. From the few times I'd spoken with him prior to this interaction, I hadn't pegged the usually laid-back aerospace tech as a stickler for company policy. In fact, looking at his method of dress, I could spot at least 2 violations. Then again, Waylon seemed like the kind of person who knew which rules were important enough to warrant his attention. "You've made your point," I shrugged, offhandedly agreeing with Waylon's insistence as I slowly trudged up the entrance ramp and scanned my ID card against its electronic lock, opening the doors to reveal inside a surprisingly plush little bridge, equipped with leather passenger seats and an impressive computer interface up front. Taking a seat next to the pilot's chair and focusing on deep breaths, I managed to keep my nerve as Waylon and Ruben filed in, taking seats at the cockpit and behind me, respectively.
"What's our status, Karen?"
asked the tech, flipping a few switches as one by one the shuttle's systems kicked on with a deep hum of increasing volume.
"All systems nominal,"
replied a distinctly feminine and somewhat monotone voice, the default vocal setting for a majority of piloting AIs. "And Ruben, sir?" My co-worker's eyes widened in surprise as Karen called him out by name. "Please do not knock on my hull. It annoys me. I'll be honest with you. I don't particularly care," Ruben snapped, apparently having been on the receiving end of enough shit for the day by way of human actors, and not willing to take any more from a machine intelligence of all things. "You have the coordinates we need, right?" "Affirmative. Jones sent them to me." "How quickly can you get us out there?" I asked through a dry mouth, my anxiety mounting as the vessel dislodged from its magnetic anchor and began rolling toward the airlock. "Depends," began Karen with a mischievous hum. "How much spaghettification is too much, in your opinion?" Obviously, that was a poor attempt by the AI at humor, yet the question nevertheless made my stomach turn a tad. "Any is too much, thank you."
"It's just messing with you,"
Waylon interjected, flippantly affirming my initial hypothesis. If smartass was a feature, Karen models would have to cost double. "Remind me again why we need an AI pilot that can talk back to us," snarked Ruben, leaning back in his seat and kicking his feet up onto the left arm of my own. "Seriously, what benefit is there to a sapient AI? I prefer the term AGI," interrupted Karen. "I am an artificial general intelligence, far and away more advanced than just an AI." Even through the pilot's emotionless cadence, I could tell she was beginning to grow genuinely agitated towards my coworker.
"Same difference,"
growled my colleague with a shrug as he tugged awkwardly upon his sweat-drenched shirt collar.
"AGIs are just a subset of AIs, so what does it matter?"
"I suppose you're correct, ape," Karen retorted without skipping a beat. Immediately, as though a switch was flipped within his mind, Ruben put his feet down and glared up at the computer screen housing Karen. "The hell did you just call me?" "What?" the intelligence flippantly replied.
"Humans are just a subset of apes, so what does it matter?"
"Cut it out, you two!" Waylon snapped, placing his palm upon Ruben's chest and pushing him back into his seat.
"Karen, you may be piloting this ship right now, but you're still Kepler Explorations equipment. Ruben outranks you."
"And Ruben, stop being a jackass before I file a complaint against you for tampering with our AI." "Wait, why is he allowed to call you that but I'm not?" asked my coworker, his tone subdued to the point of being more questioning than accusing.
"I'm fine with being called an AI, so long as you're using the term amicably, but if you're going to insult me, I reserve the right to be offended by it," replied Karen.
For a moment, it looked like Ruben was about to say something in reply, but the words died in his mouth when her front screen lit up with the rapidly decreasing numbers of a countdown clock.
"It's time to get back to work. All human crew, please be advised. We are approaching the designated warp point. Minor space-time turbulence is probable. Please ensure you are properly secured within your seats."
Seconds later, my heart jumped into my throat as the ship came to an abrupt halt, its ominous stillness accompanied by the warp drive's subtle hum as the sticks prepared to punch a hole through space-time itself. Waylon's gaze remained stoically focused upon the ship's controls, whereas Ruben's expression betrayed his sheer jubilation. "Initiating warp in 3, 2, 1. Karen droned emotionlessly, further contributing to my mounting anxiety as the warp engine's pitch hit a squealing high. My eyes squeezed shut of their own volition when our ship lurched forward into the space between space itself. Rattling like a run-down roller coaster, our ship jerked its way through the temporary wormhole, leaving us wholly at Karen's mercy as she performed the trillions of calculations required to navigate through warp space without error. If she was off by even a fraction of a percent, then we would never be returning to the station. Somehow, despite both other humans on board having extensive knowledge of what a warp failure would entail, neither of them showed any signs of concern.
"Lighten up, Henry,"
laughed Reuben, clapping his hand onto my shoulder as he leaned forward in his seat. "Karen may be the most downright infuriating AI there is, but she's damn good at her job."
"We've got about an hour of free time till we reach our destination,"
yawned Reuben, leaning back in his seat and turning away from the lights of the control panel.
"Just wake me up if something goes wrong."
Much to my surprise, the duration of our journey was entirely uneventful. Reuben largely occupied the time playing an old emulator game on his phone, only looking up on occasion to ask Karen some dumb question about where to find certain items, with her answering immediately each time. Meanwhile, I spent the first half hour just uncoiling my nerves, and the second catching up on some paperwork that was due by the month's end. When at last our ship jerked out from the wormhole, I wasted no time in accessing our sensors to pinpoint the array. As expected, the values being output were still erroneous, but with the device itself only a few miles away, we would soon discover just why that was. "See?" Reuben grinned as my shoulders finally relaxed from their tense position.
"Was that so terrible?"
"Yes." I half sighed, half growled, standing up from my comfortable chair and approaching the spacesuits lined up on either side of the airlock.
"Whatever. I'll do the maintenance outside. You guys handle troubleshooting in here." Aye, Captain,"
yawned Reuben, stretching his arms over his head before nonchalantly bringing down his fingers onto the control panel. Though marginally less bulky than the spacesuits of the 20th century, the gear required for a walk, nevertheless, resulted in rather stiff motion, forcing me to enlist Reuben's assistance in making sure it was vacuum tight. Taking in one final deep breath of the ship's clean, recycled air, I slid the helmet over my head and engaged its magnetic lock, sealing me in. For some reason utterly beyond my understanding, spacesuits of this model always smelled vaguely of used gym clothes, no matter how thoroughly they were washed. It was as though the suits themselves were haunted by the vengeful ghosts of dead armpit bacteria. Fortunately, though far from pleasant, this odor was at the very least bearable, and by the time I sealed shut the airlock door, my nostrils had already partially adjusted. Carefully clipping the anchoring cord to my suit's chest and checking a conservative 5 times just to be sure, I approached the airlock controls and began typing in the necessary 4-digit code to open the door, separating me from the cold, dark void. Thanks to Karen's piloting skills, we were able to get the ship's opening to within 10 feet of the array. Easy enough for someone like me to make the jump. Even if I did manage to fail it, though, the only thing suffering damage would be my pride as the AI reeled me back in like bait on a fishing line. Fortunately for me, such a humbling scenario would not come to pass as I effortlessly leapt through space and allowed my forward momentum unimpeded by air resistance to carry me across the gap, only coming to a stop once my gloved hand wrapped around the rim of a solar panel. "See any damage?" asked Reuben, his voice streaming crystal clear through my helmet's built-in comm system. "Let me check," I replied, climbing around the array's circumference like the most expensive jungle gym ever built, stopping every few seconds to look over a component before moving on to the next. Everything on its surface looked normal, save for a few lens scratches and minor impact marks. Nothing that could possibly skew the data this badly. Everything on the surface looks like it should be working just fine. Muffled murmuring between my coworkers gave way to the voice of Waylon as he was next to offer advice. Take a closer look at the gravity sensor and the network interface. That's where all the calcs are fucked up. Already on it, I replied, producing a wrench from my suit's built-in toolkit and carefully unfastening the 4 bolts holding the sensor panel shut, making sure to slot each on into the suit's front pocket to ensure they didn't float off into space. Cracking open the panel and peering inside at the wire-laden mechanisms, I carefully sifted through each and every one of them in search of anything resembling a flaw or breakage. After a solid 10 minutes of fruitlessly sifting through wires, I came to the conclusion that it couldn't be the gravity sensors causing this issue.
Looks like a network error, I concluded. I guess we'll have to reset the entire array. Company policy mandates that at least 2 people be present to remove the network control cover, a safety measure, they tell us, which meant that Ruben was next to don a spacesuit and join me out in the void. All right, let's see if we can... His voice cut out, and yet I didn't hear any calm static. Something had apparently rendered him speechless. Turning around rapidly to ensure he was okay, I saw my coworker standing in the airlock. What is it? I demanded, curious as to what Ruben could have seen to elicit that reaction. Look behind you, he whispered. Let me tell you, if there were 3 words that could have terrified me more in that moment, a sitting duck in the vacuum of space, then I didn't know 'em. I'm not afraid to admit that I screamed preemptively, spinning around expecting to face some horrible, unknown fate. And yet, all I saw behind me was an empty black expanse. That's not fucking funny, Ruben! I snarled, expecting that asshole to burst into laughter at any moment. And yet, he didn't. I'm not joking, he replied in a hushed whisper, pointing his finger towards the space behind me. Look. There's nothing there, I shouted at him, turning around to affirm that I hadn't somehow missed something. Indeed, there was nothing behind me, not so much as a single star looming in the distance. Exactly. Ruben again whispered, as though afraid someone might hear him. That's where the Virgo cluster is supposed to be.